Go.
Erev Tov, good evening, Baruch Haba, Shalom, welcome to our Tree of Life class. Last week we were studying the tzaddik limiting himself. The righteous tzaddik means righteous, the righteous one. Tzedakah means righteousness. And so the tzaddik is the righteous one. And we studied last week concerning how the tzaddik, how Yeshua, Mashiach, the Messiah, Yeshua, limited himself. And does anybody remember what we call this limitation? This self-imposed limitation? Tzimtzum. Very good. So we call it Tzimtzum. And Tzimtzum means to make place, to make room. And the idea is that of a woman who is expecting a child, makes room within herself for the baby. So when we think of that analogy of the woman who makes room within herself for her baby, we note a couple of things. Number one, the mother can continue to exist with or without the baby. The mother's life is not dependent upon the baby to exist. In this same way is God. God is able to exist with or without you. God does not have to have you or me. God does not need my love. He does not need my care. The truth of the matter is it makes no difference. Whether I love Him or whether I do not love Him, He continues to exist. Whether I believe in Him or I do not believe in Him, He continues to exist. God does not need me or anything that I have. He does not need you or anything that you have in order to exist. He exists all in all within Himself. And He is in need of nothing. There is nothing that He needs that is necessary for Him to continue to exist. And you remember we used the term Ein Sof last week, the infinite one. That He is infinite. Being infinite means more, it has more meaning than just without beginning and without ending. That is the way we think of being infinite. And that's the way infinity, the infinite God has been described to us, but it means more than just being without beginning and without end. It also means being without borders or boundaries, being without any limitation, which also includes being without definition. And remember we showed you, the moment we begin to define something, it begins to limit that something. Remember we talked about the elephant, right? You didn't know there was an elephant in the room until I told you that there was an elephant in the room. And I described the elephant for you. As I began to describe the elephant, I simply told you first of all what? There is something. But something could be anything. And so you are without a clue as to what this something is until I begin to define it. But the moment I begin to define it, I begin to limit it. For example, when I said that this something now is large, that automatically tells you that the something is not small. Thus, it is limited. I told you that the something is gray. That immediately tells you that it is not any other color. Therefore it is limited. And so on and so on. And so it is with God himself. The moment we begin to define him, the moment we give him defining terms, then we begin to limit him. We begin to limit him. But he does this himself. He does this to himself, for himself. He limits himself. He gives himself defining terms. He limits himself. Why? In order that we might understand him. How do you understand infinity? How do we, with these finite brains, understand that which is limitless, boundless, indefinite? I can't. You and I cannot conceive of these things. Therefore, in order for God to allow us to have some kind of perspective of him, he limits himself. He gives his own self defining terms. Thus what? Seems soon. He makes place. He makes room for us. When we understand what an awesome thing just this is, that he's making room for us. I can remember, I remember growing up, and very little, probably 5 or 6 years old, and Dad bought a TV. Now, back then, TVs were, not everybody had a TV, much less having a TV in every other room of the house, like some people do today. There was one TV, and it was a black and white TV, and we had 2 TV stations, Channel 4 and Channel 5. That was it. And so, when my brothers and my older sister had gone to school, the bus came by and picked them up, and we would ask Mom, my younger brother and sister and myself, we would be at home, and we would ask Mom if we could watch Captain Kangaroo. And they would also have, there would be some cartoons in there, morning cartoons and such as that for the little kids. And so my dad would wake up, my dad would get up. He was not real thrilled about watching Captain Kangaroo. And he was not real thrilled about watching cartoons. And so he would get up and he would come in the living room and he would sit down and he would turn the channel to the news. Were we interested in watching the news? No, we wanted to watch Captain Kangaroo. So we would beg Dad, please let us watch Captain Kangaroo, turn the channel back, let us watch Captain Kangaroo, turn the channel, please turn the channel. And Dad would make all kinds of, he would make all kinds of movements, like, you know, he would, oh, I'm sorry it didn't turn, I'm sorry it didn't turn. One day I remember one morning he told me, you turned your channel. You turned your channel. And I said, how do I turn my channel? He said, well, stand up. I stood up. He said, well, now spin around and see if the channel changes. See if you can turn the channel. And so I started spinning around and spinning around. And I tripped on my feet and I fell down. And I got an ouchie. And so I started to cry because I got an ouchie. Right? Got a little owie and started to cry. Dad picked me up off of the floor, held me in his arms for a couple of minutes, and he said, okay, you've earned it. We'll watch Captain Kangaroo this morning. And so Dad turned the channel and we watched Captain Kangaroo. Now what does all of this mean? Why am I telling you such a silly story? I'm telling you this story because what my dad did was this. He was making place for me. He's dad. He's the adult. He didn't have to do that. He could insist on watching the news. But he had compassion on me because I fell down and I got an owie. Right? He felt sorry for me, so what? He made room for me. He made place for me. All of this to say that this is what Yeshua Mashiach has done for us. Why? Because you remember what we were studying last week, that He is the express image of the Father. He who has seen me has seen the Father. Do you remember Him saying that? The Talmudim, the disciples said, show us the Father. And what does Yeshua say? He who has seen me has seen the Father. Why? He is in the express image of the Father. In other words, what? B'Tselem Elohim. In His image. In His likeness. Remember, we've been discussing Salam, the shadow, that we are the shadow. We're to be the shadow of the Creator. We're to be the shadow of God. And so you remember we spent a great deal of time last week talking about how Yeshua spoke to that He did nothing of His own accord. He did nothing of Himself. He said, all that I do what I see the Father doing. I do what I see my Father doing. He did not speak of His own accord. He did not do of His own accord. He followed only the instruction of His Father. This is B'Tselem Elohim. This is in the image of God. And that Yeshua Mashiach is in the express image of God. Therefore, if I, a follower of Yeshua, if I want to be godly, how am I godly? How am I to be godly? What does this mean to be godly? In order for me to be godly, I must follow the way of Yeshua, who is following the way of God. Yeshua is doing only what God has instructed him to do. That he does nothing of his own, but only what the Father has given to him. Therefore, I follow Yeshua. And if I will follow Yeshua, then I will be following God. It's as simple as this. How Rav Shaul, how the Apostle Paul says, follow after me as I follow after Yeshua, as I follow after Messiah. And so this is Tzimtzum. Saying that Tzimtzum is Yesod. That Tzimtzum, Yesod means foundation. So to make place is foundational for a follower of Yeshua. Making room, making place is foundational for a follower of God, for a person who strives, who is looking to be godly. I must be willing to make place. I must be willing to make room. And so we've spent a lot of time discussing Philippians chapter 2, verses 5 through 8. Just let me read it to you. Have this attitude in yourself, which was also in Messiah Yeshua, who though existing in the form of God, did not consider being equal to God a thing to be grasped, but he emptied himself. This is Tzimtzum. That he emptied himself. Now, so remember, keep these things in mind. Tzimtzum is the foundation of being a follower of Yeshua. Remember, we said that. Making room, making place is foundational. Therefore, if I'm a follower of Yeshua, he made tzimtzum for us, correct? He made place for us. In what means, in what way did he make place for us? Philippians 2, 5 through 8, have this attitude in yourself, which also in Mashiach Yeshua, who though existing in the form of God, did not consider being equal to God a thing to be grasped, but he emptied himself. Therefore, if I am a follower of Yeshua, then what? I take on the aspect of my rabbi. I take on the attributes of my rabbi. So even as Yeshua was taking on the attributes of the Father and doing those things, expressing the attributes of the Father, so then I follow the same way. I do what Yeshua does. So doing what? I take on the attributes of the Father. And how did he take on the attributes of the Father? Well, the Father, at the very beginning of creation, the first thing he does is tzimtzum. He makes a place for us. He makes a place for creation within himself because he's all that exists. So he must make room within himself for us to exist. He must make a place for us. And so he moves, if you would, like a mother. The comparison to a mother, what does a mother do? When she conceives a child, she moves part of herself out of the way to make room for the child. So organs here are pushed up and out of the way, organs in the back are pushed more to the back, organs underneath are pushed down, and room is made for the child to grow within the mother. Now we started off by saying, does the mother need the child in order to continue to exist? No. Does the child need the mother in order to continue to exist? Yes. The mother cannot exist without the child. So if the mother does not make room for the child will not be able to exist. This does not add to or take away anything from the mother. So, if God does not make room for us to exist, we cannot exist. This does not add to or take anything away from God. It simply is. So, in this same way, that the Father himself pushes a part of himself, if you would, out of the way in order for us to exist, so Yeshua also empties himself. Now, why does he empty himself? What does he empty himself of? From what does he empty himself? Very good. Of himself? Say what? Of himself. Okay, so what do we mean empty himself? Of what? Of himself. Okay, well, that's good. What does that mean? What does that mean?
Making room, seems so.
Huh?
He's making room, seems so.
Yes, but what does it mean to empty himself? He's making room, that's good. But what does it mean? Okay, so if you look at this passage, go to Philippians 2.
Pour out himself?
Huh?
To pour out.
Okay, he pours out himself, good. That's emptying himself, he pours out himself. But watch this. Go back, is it verse 5 or 6? Because I don't have the verse markings here, I just have the verse here. Verse 5, start at verse 5. Have this attitude in yourself, which also was in Mashiach Yeshua. Here. Who though existing in the form of God, did not consider being equal to God a thing to be grasped. Saying what? He did not walk around throwing it in their faces, I'm God. So much so that there are different groups who would even go so far as to say he's not God. He never said he was God. He never claimed to be God. There are even those few in the Messianic movement who say that, who would claim that. But this is incorrect. What he did not do was he did not boast about his position, his situation. He did not boast. This was not a thing, he said, it says to be grasped. This was not something to be clutched. This was not something to be, that he was, that, how do I put this, to be proud of. In other words, he did not go flaunting this around. You know, coming in, I'm God, right? Go ahead, do what you will to me, see what happens. They could not put him to death except he allowed it, not only allowed it, required it. They could not touch him. And in fact, they could not touch him until the time was appropriate. Remember, they tried to kill him multiple times. And that in these multiple times, because it was not the appropriate time, it was not what he called the appointed time, the moed, by the way. Because it was not the moed, everyone say moed. It was not the appointed time. Do you remember that he was in his own city of Nazareth, Nazareth? He was in his own city of Nazareth. And you remember that they called him up to read from the scroll. And do you remember that in reading from the scroll, he reads a certain portion of Scripture? This portion of Scripture from Yeshayahu, Isaiah, proclaiming the year of liberty, proclaiming the year of Yovel, Jubilee. And you remember that he, as he finishes the portion, it's called the Haftorah, the after Torah portion, which comes from the prophets. When he finishes reading this portion of Scripture, what does he say? Anybody remember?
Today it's been fulfilled.
These things have been fulfilled before you this day. And the people what? By the way, that's one of our proof texts about Shabbat. Because it says what? That he was in the synagogue on Shabbat, as was his custom. But, so, what do the people do?
Blasphemy.
They are offended by his statement. They take him outside. It appears that they're going to throw him off of a cliff. And what happens? What happens to him?
Disappears in the crowd.
He passes through them. And they're unable to touch him. Time after time after time, people try to kill him. They set traps for him. They do this, they do that. And yet time after time he's able to get out, get away from it. He even is able to walk on water, get out of a boat, calm the sea, do all of these different kinds of things, calm the storm, correct? He's able to do all of these things. Why? Because it's not his appointed time. Saying what? They could not touch him until he commanded them, as it were. He required them to. Okay, now's the appointed time. Now you will kill him. You remember that when he's discussing all of this with his Talmudim, with the disciples, that he does not say that they might put him to death. They will put me to death. He even gives them when and where, how long he's going to be in the grave. He lays it all out for them. Why? Because he is divine. He is deity. But he didn't go throwing his weight around. He wasn't all arrogant and proud. He didn't act all arrogant and proud about it. In fact, not only does he not act arrogant and proud about it, but what? Come on. Not only does he not act arrogant and proud about it, but what?
He's humble.
He's humble. He goes the opposite direction. He tells people the opposite of what we would think. When somebody's talking good about you, talking it up good. How do you feel when people are talking it up good about you? Huh? Not necessarily in front of you, but they're bragging on you. If they're bragging on you, how does that make you feel? Good. You seen that, Emilio? I wish I had. Huh? Did you see what Richard did? Did you see how he took care of that situation? And so it makes us feel good. And we start feeling good about ourselves. When people start bragging on us and we start feeling good about ourselves. How about this one? You ever brag on yourself? Did you see how I did that? I have a friend. I don't see him much anymore, but back in the day, back when I was young, and we were together all the time, and he would do something, and he would turn and look at me with a big smile on his face, and he would say, "Man, I'm good. Man, I'm good. You see how I did that? You see how good I am?" This is our human nature. These are the things he emptied himself. We say he emptied himself of what? She said of himself. Yes, exactly. Of himself. Meaning what? He emptied himself of himself. This is he emptied himself of his ego. He emptied himself of his ego. But rather what? He takes on humility. Now, as I've been telling you for the last several weeks, we need to be very careful with this because this is all laying down the foundation for Netzach. Because Netzach is very difficult. Why is Netzach very difficult? Because Netzach Netzach means what? Victory. But where do we get the victory? In what do we find victory? Self-sacrifice. This is where we get the victory. And let me say that most of us, you see, this is why I say that this is very difficult. What a lot of us think of as self-sacrifice is not really self-sacrifice. In fact, what a lot of people think of as self-sacrifice is simply human decency. What most people think of as being self-sacrifice is very simple, very simply human decency. It's not true self-sacrifice. Self-sacrifice is a very difficult thing to do. And the truth is, I cannot do this if I'm not here. If I'm not willing to empty myself. How many of you remember the story of Yitzhak and Abraham? And the fact that Yitzhak was, that God had required the life of Yitzhak. You remember the story? Just a second. So the sacrifice of Yitzhak is called the Akedah. Everyone say Akedah.
Akedah.
There's a strange thing concerning the Akedah that we really don't think of because of our Sunday school upbringing and our Sunday school days. That is the age of Yitzhak. Because when we grow up in Sunday school, we see the pictures, we see Yitzhak as being maybe a 10, 12-year-old boy. Well, Abraham is over 100 years old right now. So even at 10 or 12 or 13, I kind of would figure that Yitzhak could probably outrun Abraham. No? We think of him as being a child. God does not say to Abraham, I require your child of you. He says, I require your son. Your only son. Not your child, your son. Why? Because at the Akedah, at the sacrifice of Yitzhak, he's not 8 or 10 years old. He's not 12 or 13 or 16 or 18. Rather, the sages tell us that he's in his 30s. Maybe 40, between 30 and 40 years old. Saying what? Richard, how old are you?
33.
33. So right there. Oh, that's the age of Yeshua. He's 33 years old. Many rabbis put his age at 32. What does this tell you? Because does Yitzhak struggle with Abraham over this? No. As a 32, 33, 30-something year old man, he puts himself up on the altar. He puts his own hand behind his back. Without a struggle, he lays himself down on the altar to allow his father to take his life. How does he do this? Right here. It's all right there. You see, this is what I'm saying when I say that this thing about self-sacrifice, this thing about netzach, what we consider self-sacrifice, is actually mostly just human decency. What is really meant, what is really required by self-sacrifice is sacrificing oneself. And that's exactly what Yitzhak was willing to do. He was willing to sacrifice himself in order to prove the emunah, the faith, the trust, the confidence of his father Abraham. But watch, Yeshua Mashiach did the same exact thing, did he not? What's the difference between Yeshua and Yitzhak? What's the difference between Yeshua and Yitzhak?
Yeshua was actually sacrificed.
Yeshua actually dies. He's actually sacrificed. Yitzhak is allowed to get up and go. There's a replacement for Yitzhak. There is no replacement for Yeshua. This is what we mean by he emptied himself. It's not just that he put down his ego, that he let go of his ego, or those kinds of terminologies. Rather, it is that he had no ego. He had no, if you would, he had no self-awareness. What do we mean he had no self-awareness? He had no self-awareness because he lost himself in his Father. That he completely lost himself in his Father. So that as in he had no ego, he had no will of his own. He had no will of his own. So that his will, what was his will? Come on, what was his will? To do the will of the Father who sent him. His will was the Father's will. The Father's will was his will. They were one and the same. If you wanted to know what Yeshua wanted, all you had to do was know what God wanted, and you knew what Yeshua wanted. All you had to do is know what the Father wanted, and you knew what Yeshua wanted. Because they were the same. What did the Father want? They were the same. There was no distinction between the two. How oftentimes this is our struggle. And this is our struggle. This is our daily struggle. That my will, what I want, does not line up with what God wants. The struggle comes in where? What I want does not line up, is not in line with what God wants. Where does the struggle come in? Where does the struggle come in? That I'm not willing to lay down my will for His will. Rather, what do? I cling to my will. Why? Self-importance and self-preservation. Okay? The enemy of this, the opposite of this, self-importance, self-preservation. To keep oneself alive. Self-preservation. Now, in saying all of this, these two are opposite. These two are enemies. These two do not work together. Because this says what? Willing to die. Is this willing to die? Is this willing to die? No. This says, I know my rights. Now, we may not say this per se to God, but oftentimes we have this attitude. It is because of this that we say, one of our most favorite quotes here, you're the boss of me. Saying what? You can't tell me what to do. And this is the heart. This is the heart of the great vast majority of people, of human beings. Don't tell me what to do. In fact, this is the root, if you would, of sin. We don't like being told what to do. So, we're studying Shabbat, on Shabbat. Right? We've been studying Shabbat for the last few weeks. What is this thing about Shabbat? What is it? What is this thing about Shabbat? Why is it that by keeping, because we keep Shabbat, that we're called legalists? And as I have pointed out for the last couple of weeks, what is the opposite of a legalist? Yes, but to put it in a very blunt term, the opposite of a legalist is an illegalist. Correct? Yeah. If I'm doing what is legal, what does that mean, legal?
Obey the law.
According to the law. Legal means according to law. So what's the opposite of according to law? Illegal. Illegal. Which is a person who is illegal is a lawbreaker, correct? So when we're being accused of being legalists, because we keep Shabbat, the response very simply is, what? You're an illegalist. Very good. This is true. Where we're going to go this Shabbat is, how do we keep the day sanctified? How do we keep it separate? How do we keep it apart? Very simple. You don't do on that day, you do not do on that day what you do the other 6 days. So what? You don't go shopping. You don't go to restaurants. You don't go to the laundromat. You don't mow the grass. You don't work in the garden. You don't do this. You don't clean the house. You don't do these. You don't do any of these things. Why? It's a day of rest. You shall not do any work. What do we not understand about you shall not do any work? And so one of the things that we've been expressing for several weeks now is the curiosity that Monday through Friday we're wishing for the weekend because we don't want to work. Right? Come on. Right? And so what? You're there at work? And you're saying what? I wish I didn't have to work. I wish I didn't have to work every day. I wish I didn't have to work. I wish I didn't have to be here. I wish I didn't have to work. I wish I didn't have to work. I wish, how many times have we said, I wish I could just lay in bed today and read a book? You ever said that? I wish I didn't have anything to do today but read a book. So God gives us Shabbat, in which He tells us, don't do anything but read a book. No dishes, no laundry, no mopping, sweeping, vacuuming, no cutting of the lawn, no gardening, none of these kinds of things. Don't do any of these kinds of things. Don't go shopping. Don't go to the bank. Don't go out to a restaurant to eat. Stay at home with your family and have a vacation. And we say, well, that's legalism. Correct? That's what we're told. That we're being legalists. Several years ago, back in the 90s, I was taking some English courses from, what's the Adventist college up there by Waco? Southwestern Adventist, yes. Southwestern Adventist College is in a little town. And the town, the whole town is not Adventist, but the majority of the people there are. And the college basically makes up the town. And so I was there for a week taking some courses, a week-long set of courses for college credit. And I was there over a Shabbat, over a Sabbath. And one of the things about this town, it was really cool. The whole town shut down. The whole town. Everything was closed. There was nothing open. They had a grocery store, it was closed. They had a convenience store, it was closed. Everything in the town was closed. The whole downtown area is closed down. Why? Well, because it was the Sabbath, and because most of the people in the town are Adventists, and so they honor the Sabbath. And the ones who weren't Adventists would not get any customers anyway, because the whole town was Adventist, right? You with me? So the whole town closed down. The whole town shut down. When my wife and I were in Bible college, Tennessee Temple University, and there was an Adventist college up there, right outside of Chattanooga, and McKay's Bakery. McKay's Bakery made Little Debbie cakes. How many of you remember Little Debbie cakes? Mm-hmm. Right? And so McKay's Bakery made those. So most of the, not most of them, but a lot of the college students from the Baptist Bible College, where I was going to college, worked at McKay's Bakery. McKay. Something like that. But anyway, so it was a curious thing for us. My brother was one who worked there. I had a couple of brothers actually who worked there, and a sister-in-law who worked there. That this factory completely closed down for the Sabbath. It shut down. So all of these students who are Baptists observing Sunday, not Saturday, were off on Saturday because the whole factory would close down for Sabbath. And then When the Sabbath was over, it would start back up again, which would be what day?
Sunday.
Therefore, all of these Baptist Bible college students were having to go work on Sunday at this Adventist, not owned by the Adventists, but the family was Adventist and so owned by them. What I'm saying is, to what extent? And we sit here and we clamor. Because we have it so hard during the week, and then God goes and gives us a day off, and then we tell what's our response to Him? You can't tell me what to do. You're not the boss of me. If I want to mow my grass today, I'll mow my grass today. If I want to do dishes today, I'll do dishes today. If I want to do this, I'll do this. If I want to do that, I'll do that. If I want to go shopping, I'll go shopping. If I want to go to the restaurant, I'll go to the restaurant. And then we wonder why we have issues. The truth is that all of this is the enemy. All of this is simply this: self-importance and self-preservation. The reason why I say this is because I still have an ego. As long as I have an ego, it's about me. As long as I have me, as long as it's about me, then it's about me. And as long as it's about me, it's not about you. As long as it's about me, it's not about God. I still have an ego. And having an ego is the opposite of self-sacrifice. This is what it means of emptying, that He emptied Himself. That He emptied Himself of Himself. What? That He lost His own identity in the identity of the Father. What do? I lose my identity. This is what will take us into Netzach. This is what will take us into victory. This is what will take us into the realm of self-sacrifice. That I lose my identity in His identity. Remember what we said. That a Talmid takes on the attribute of his rabbi. The Talmid takes on the attribute of his rabbi. So that the Talmid, the student, begins to look like his rabbi, sound like his rabbi, act like his rabbi, dress like his rabbi, eat like his rabbi, act like his rabbi, talk like his rabbi, think like his rabbi, so that everything is about now his rabbi. That he loses himself in his rabbi. He loses his self-identity in his rabbi. This is why you will see groups of ultra-Orthodox Jews who are all dressed the same. The reason why they're all dressed the same is that they are emulating their rabbi. They all look the same, they all act the same, they all talk the same, they all sound the same. Why? They're emulating their rabbi. What? They're living out their life in the express image of their rabbi. This is what we are supposed to be doing. He's my rabbi. Therefore, I should be taking his attributes to myself. Therefore, I should be acting like him, talking like him, walking like him, dressing like him, living like him, thinking like him. I lose my identity in him. I lose my identity and I take on his identity, so that when you see me, you should not be seeing me, you should be seeing Yeshua. You should be seeing my rabbi. Do you remember when Yeshua says, I do not speak of my own, but I speak of the Father. I do not do of my own, but I do of the Father. Remember when he said those things? This is not something new. If you read the Talmud, it does exactly this. It says that Rabbi so-and-so, speaking in the name of Rabbi so-and-so, said. Saying what? That he's not telling you his idea, that he's not telling you it's not from himself. This is what my rabbi used to teach us. So the Rabbi Gaon speaking in the name of Rabbi Akiva. Why? Because we don't speak of that which of our own thoughts and our own mind. And so I don't speak. I'm not to speak of from my own intuition, my own thinking, my own mind. Rather what? I'm to speak of Yeshua, of his way. He's the rabbi. And so I'm to mimic him. I'm to be in his image, in his likeness. So the things that I say are to be things that he said or he would say. How he would say, what he would do, how he would dress, all of these things. Saying what? I'm losing my own ego. I'm losing my own identity. What? He emptied himself. He took on the form of a slave, becoming the likeness of man, being found in appearance as a man. He humbled himself, became obedient to the point of death, even the death of the cross. What? He lost this, and he took on this. He lost this, he took on this. And I'm to follow him in those footsteps. That's the path I'm to follow. This is the pathway to Netzach. This is the pathway to victory. It goes through self-sacrifice. Self-sacrifice, giving up myself for the sake of God and for the sake of others. Where do I start? Number one, sin. Number two, that which is unnecessary. These two things. That's the self-sacrifice. That's the beginning. When I start giving up my sin, okay. But when I start giving up, not things that are required of me to give up, not things that are demanded or by law, by Torah, the things that are unnecessary for me, for the sake of others and for the sake of the kingdom, then I've started the path to Netzach. And so we will take it up there next week, that we say Brachot Shalom L'Layla Tov.